The crystal chandelier shattered, raining glass over the blood-stained marble floor. Bridget adjusted her heavy diamond rings, her massive chest heaving with spite as she leaned over the trembling woman trapped beneath her shadow. "You're not enough for him," she whispered, a cruel, breathless smirk stretching across her powdered face. It was her ultimate power play. But what Bridget didn't know was that the man they were fighting over was standing right in the doorway, and he had already signed her death warrant. In the shadowy, cutthroat world of the Boston underworld, power was not given. It was taken, bled for, and fiercely guarded. Aeneas Costello was a man who understood this better than anyone. At 34, Aeneas had carved out an empire that stretched from the concrete docks of South Boston to the glittering high-rises of the financial district. He was a phantom, wrapped in tailored Italian wool, a man whose quiet, terrifying competence had united 3 warring syndicates under his sole command. But Aeneas's pristine empire had a singular, glaring blemish: the Hill operation. Bridget Hill was an anomaly in the Mafia hierarchy, but she was a devastatingly effective one. Bridget was a woman of massive physical proportions. Morbidly obese, weighing well over 350 pounds, she used her immense size as a psychological weapon. Where other mob bosses tried to blend in, Bridget demanded space. She draped her vast frame in custom-made silk caftans, in lurid shades of emerald and crimson, her thick neck perpetually adorned with layered diamond chokers that caught the low light of her underground casinos. Her physical weight was a direct reflection of her gluttony for power. She sat in her custom-reinforced leather chair at the back of the velvet room, her primary front like a bloated spider in the center of an inescapable web, breathing heavily, always eating, always watching. She had inherited a modest smuggling ring from her late husband, Thomas Hill, but it was Bridget who had ruthlessly expanded it into a multi-million-dollar logistics empire. She controlled the shipping lanes, greased the palms of the harbor masters, and strangled anyone who tried to bypass her docks. She was fat, vicious, and deeply insecure, masking her profound self-loathing with a terrifyingly casual approach to murder. Aeneas despised her. To Aeneas, Bridget was sloppy loud and needlessly cruel, but she held the leases to the commercial shipyards, making her an unfortunate necessity for his international imports. He tolerated her paying her exorbitant docking fees, waiting for the precise moment to dismantle her. And then Clara Jenkins stumbled into the crossfire. Clara was not meant for the world of bullets and blood money. She was a forensic accountant, 26 years old, employed by a mid-tier auditing firm named Harrison Bradley Associates. She was assigned to review the books of a seemingly legitimate logistics company, a company secretly owned by Aeneas Costello. Clara was brilliant, meticulous, and entirely too curious for her own good. Late one rainy Tuesday evening, while cross-referencing shell corporations, Clara found a discrepancy. It was a subtle misallocation of funds, hidden deep within a web of dummy LLCs. Most auditors would have missed it. Clara did not. Instead of reporting it to her superiors, she attempted to trace it naively, thinking it was a simple clerical error. Her digital footprints triggered an alarm in Aeneas's network. Within 48 hours, Clara found herself sitting in the dimly lit back office of a defunct meatpacking plant, her wrists bound with zip ties, staring into the cold slate-grey eyes of Aeneas Costello. Aeneas had intended to interrogate her, find out who she was working for, and dispose of her. But as he sat across from her, he found himself entirely disarmed. Clara was terrified, yes, but she refused to cower. Her hazel eyes met his with a fiery, stubborn intelligence. She didn't beg for her life. She pointed out the flaws in his money-laundering scheme. She told him his dummy corporations were vulnerable to a federal audit and casually explained how he could fix it all while her hands shook violently. Something shifted in Aeneas. For a man surrounded by sycophants and killers, Clara's sheer, unvarnished honesty was intoxicating. He didn't kill her. Instead, he forced her to work for him. He cut ties with Harrison Bradley Associates under the guise of an executive hire, bringing Clara directly into the fold of the Costello organization. As weeks bled into months, the forced proximity sparked something entirely unexpected. Clara, initially horrified by the reality of Aeneas's life, slowly began to see the man beneath the monster. She saw the burdens he carried, the strict code of honor he enforced among his men, and the surprising gentleness he reserved only for her. And Aeneas, for the first time in his violently chaotic life, found peace. Clara became his anchor. He bought her a sprawling, secure penthouse overlooking the Charles River, surrounding her with armed guards, attempting to keep the brutality of his world from touching her. But in the Mafia, secrets are the most expensive currency, and Bridget Hill was exceptionally wealthy. Bridget had been feeling the squeeze. Aeneas had been quietly buying up the municipal politicians who normally protected Bridget's harbor operations. Her profits were dipping, and her temper was fraying. Sitting at her massive mahogany dining table, wiping grease from her lips with a linen napkin, she listened to her chief enforcer, Gregory Davies. "Costello is distracted," Gregory reported, sliding a manila folder across the polished wood. "He's got a girl, a civilian, keeps her locked up in a penthouse on Beacon Street. My guys say he visits her every night. No escorts, no business meetings. Just her." Bridget's fleshy face contorted. Her small, cruel eyes narrowed as she flipped open the folder, staring at the surveillance photos of Clara. A sharp, burning jealousy gnawed at her insides. Years ago, before her husband's death, Bridget had made a brazen advance on a younger Aeneas Costello, offering an alliance sealed in the bedroom. Aeneas had rejected her with a cold, polite disgust that Bridget had never forgotten. She had convinced herself that Aeneas was simply incapable of love, a machine driven only by ambition. Seeing Clara, a slender, unremarkable civilian with no power, no money, and no standing, ignited a visceral rage within her. "Look at her." Bridget spat her voice, a wet, gravelly rasp. "Skin and bones. Pathetic. He thinks he can bleed my territory dry while he plays house with a little accountant." Bridget reached for a crystal decanter of bourbon, pouring a heavy measure. Her mind, as sharp as it was, twisted began to turn. Aeneas Costello was an unstoppable force, heavily armed and deeply entrenched. But Clara Jenkins. Clara was a glass figurine sitting on the edge of a table. All Bridget had to do was push her over. "Pull back our men from the south end." Bridget wheezed, tapping her thick, diamond-encrusted fingers against the glass. "Let Costello think he's winning the territory. I want him arrogant. I want him blind. And then we take the girl." The winter wind howled off the Atlantic, battering the glass walls of the Beacon Street penthouse. Inside, the temperature was warm, the air thick with the scent of burning cedar and expensive espresso. Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering Boston skyline. She was draped in one of Aeneas's heavy cashmere sweaters, a stark contrast to the sterile, terrifying world she had been dragged into. Aeneas stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He pressed a kiss into her hair, his breathing slow and steady. "You're thinking too loudly," Aeneas murmured, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. "I'm reviewing the quarterly reports in my head." Clara lied softly, leaning into his warmth. "Your legitimate construction fronts are bleeding money because of the steel tariffs." Aeneas turned her around, his hands resting gently on her hips. "I didn't bring you up here to worry about steel tariffs, Clara. You brought me up here to launder your money, Aeneas. I'm just doing my job." she teased, though a shadow of anxiety flickered in her eyes. The truth was, she had noticed the anomalies in the latest ledger from the dockyards. Bridget Hill's name was peppered throughout the reports, attached to exorbitant, unexplainable fees. "I brought you here," Aeneas said, his tone turning fiercely serious, "because you are the only real thing in my life." The romance between them had blossomed in the darkest of corners. It was a terrifying, all-consuming love. Clara knew the things Aeneas did. She saw the blood on his knuckles when he came home late. She knew the weight of the holster he took off before climbing into bed. Yet she loved him with a quiet desperation. He was her captor, turned protector. But outside the bulletproof glass of the penthouse, the turf war was silently escalating. Bridget Hill was playing a dangerous patient game. She had noticed Aeneas's aggressive moves on her secondary warehouses. Instead of retaliating with immediate violence, she orchestrated a series of strategic retreats, giving Aeneas the illusion of a swift victory. She wanted him overextended. She wanted his lieutenants busy managing new territories, leaving his personal security detail stretched thin. Bridget spent her days gorging on catered meals from Boston's finest restaurants, while plotting from her subterranean fortress beneath the Velvet Room. She despised movement, preferring to let the world come to her. But for Clara Jenkins, she was willing to make an exception. The psychological warfare began subtly. Clara started receiving things at the supposedly secret penthouse. It started with a bouquet of dead black roses left at the concierge desk, bearing no card. Then came the photographs, pictures of Clara walking to her car in the underground garage, pictures of Aeneas leaving the building, pictures taken through a telephoto lens from a neighboring high-rise. Aeneas went into a lethal frenzy. He doubled the guards, completely severing Clara's physical connection to the outside world. He hunted down the paparazzi and low-level thugs who took the photos, torturing them in the damp basements of his warehouses. But they were all dead ends, disposable pawns, hired through third-party encrypted apps. Clara felt the walls closing in. The penthouse, once her sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. "Aeneas, you're suffocating me," Clara pleaded one evening, watching him load a fresh magazine into his Glock 19. "I can't even go down to the lobby. The guards follow me from room to room. Someone is hunting you." "Clara!" Aeneas snapped his eyes, flashing with a rare, uncontrollable panic. "You think this is a game? The people I deal with, they don't care about the rules. If they find you, they will use you to break me." "Is it the Hill woman?" Clara asked, her analytical mind piecing the puzzle together. "I saw the doc reports. You've been squeezing her margins for a month. She's retaliating." Aeneas stopped staring at her with a mixture of pride and dread. "Bridget Hill is a dying animal, Clara. She's bleeding out and she's thrashing. I'm handling it. By the end of the week, her entire infrastructure will be dismantled. I just need you to stay safe until it's done." What Aeneas didn't know was that Bridget wasn't just thrashing. She was executing a surgical strike. Bridget had found the weak link in Aeneas's armor, a young security guard named Michael, whose gambling debts had put him squarely in the crosshairs of a ruthless loan shark operating out of Providence. Bridget bought the debt, and with it, she bought Michael. She summoned Michael to the Velvet Room. The young guard stood trembling in the center of the opulent, dimly lit office. Bridget sat behind her desk, a plate of glazed pastries resting on her massive lap. She took a slow, deliberate bite of an eclair, the cream smearing onto her chin before dabbing it away with a silk handkerchief. Her sheer size was intimidating, her physical mass dominating the room, making the air feel thick and unbreathable. "You look nervous, Michael." Bridget wheezed a cruel smile, revealing her perfectly capped teeth. I can get you the security codes, Mrs. Hill." Michael stammered. I can give you the patrol rotations for the penthouse." Bridget laughed, a deep, rattling sound that shook her heavy frame. "I don't want codes, you stupid boy. Costello changes them every 12 hours. I want you to open the door." She leaned forward, the leather of her chair groaning under her immense weight. Thursday night. Costello is meeting with the New York families at the Arlington estate. He'll be gone for 3 hours. The girl will be alone with the night detail. You are going to spike the coffee of the interior guards. Then you will open the freight elevator for my men. If I do that, Costello will kill me, Michael whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "If you don't," Bridget replied casually, picking up another pastry, "I will have Gregory skin your mother alive in her living room, and then I'll kill you." The trap was set. Bridget felt a thrill of anticipation course through her heavy veins. She wasn't just going to kidnap Clara Jenkins. She was going to shatter Aeneas Costello's soul. She wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who had stolen the only man Bridget had ever deemed worthy of her equal, and she wanted to break her into 1,000,000 unfixable pieces. Thursday evening arrived with a torrential downpour, the rain lashing against the city like a punishment. Aeneas had been reluctant to leave, lingering at the door of the penthouse, his jaw tight with unspoken anxiety. He had kissed Clara fiercely, promising to be back before midnight. For the first hour, Clara tried to distract herself. She pored over the digital ledgers on her tablet, trying to untangle the messy, chaotic finances of the Hill Syndicate. But an uneasy feeling settled deep in her stomach. The penthouse was too quiet. At 10:15 p.m. the lights flickered and died. The backup generators should have kicked in instantly, but the apartment remained submerged in darkness, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning outside. Clara stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Michael," she called out, stepping out of the master bedroom and into the vast, open-plan living area. "Vince!" There was no answer. A heavy mechanical groan echoed from the kitchen hallway. The freight elevator, the one used exclusively by maintenance, which was supposed to be electronically locked down, was moving. Panic seized Clara. She remembered the panic room Aeneas had installed behind the library bookcase. She bolted toward the hallway, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. But she was too late. Heavy flashlights cut through the darkness, blinding her. 2 massive men in tactical gear stepped out of the shadows, grabbing her before she could even scream. She fought, kicking and scratching her nails, digging into the Kevlar vests of her attackers, but they overpowered her easily, throwing her roughly onto the velvet sofa in the center of the living room. Then the heavy thud of footsteps echoed from the freight elevator. Slow, deliberate, and incredibly heavy. Clara squinted against the glare of the flashlights as the men stepped aside. Bridget Hill entered the room. She was a monolithic presence, draped in a dark purple velvet cape that did nothing to conceal her morbid obesity. Bridget seemed to consume the space around her. She was breathing heavily from the exertion of walking from the elevator, her chest heaving, the layered diamond necklaces clinking loudly in the eerie silence of the dark penthouse. The air suddenly smelled of heavy, cloying floral perfume and sweat. "Turn on the emergency lanterns," Bridget rasped, waving a thick, fleshy hand at her men. "I want to see what all the fuss is about." Battery-powered lanterns flared to life, casting harsh, dramatic shadows across the luxurious room. Bridget stood over Clara, her small, dark eyes raking over the younger woman's slender frame with undisguised contempt. Clara forced herself to sit up, her heart threatening to beat out of her chest. She had seen files and surveillance photos of Bridget, but the reality of the woman was suffocating. "You must be Bridget," Clara said, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to keep it steady. Bridget laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "And you must be the little accountant, the mouse who thinks she can sleep in the lion's den." Bridget moved closer, the floorboards groaning under her immense weight. She practically collapsed into Aeneas's bespoke leather armchair opposite the sofa, the chair straining to accommodate her vast width. She reached into her cape, pulling out a custom silver-plated revolver, resting it casually on her heavily padded thigh. "He really bought you a palace, didn't he?" Bridget sneered, looking around the opulent penthouse. High ceilings, bulletproof glass, Italian marble. All for a plain, scrawny little civilian. "Whatever you think you're going to get from Aeneas by doing this, you're wrong," Clara said, edging backward on the sofa. "He won't negotiate with you." "Negotiate?" Bridget spat the word like poison. "I didn't come here to negotiate, little girl. I came here to take away his heart right before I take his territory." Bridget leaned forward, a difficult maneuver given her size. Her face was flushed, her expression twisted with a deep, ugly bitterness. "You think he loves you? You think a man like Aeneas Costello is capable of love? He's a machine. He saw a shiny new toy and he took it. But a man like him needs a queen. He needs power, he needs weight, he needs someone who understands the darkness." Bridget stood up, her sheer physical mass towering over Clara. She moved closer, trapping Clara between the sofa and her vast, immovable body. Clara felt the heat radiating from the mob boss, the heavy, sour smell of her breath making her nauseous. Bridget reached down with a thick, diamond-ringed hand, painfully grabbing Clara by the jaw, forcing the younger woman to look up into her terrifying face. "Look at you," Bridget whispered, her voice dripping with venomous spite. "You're weak. You're fragile. You are nothing." Bridget adjusted her grip, her heavy chest heaving with spite, as she leaned over the trembling woman trapped beneath her shadow. "You're not enough for him," she whispered, a cruel, breathless smirk stretching across her powdered face. It was her ultimate power play, the culmination of years of jealousy, greed, and ruthless ambition. Bridget savored the fear in Clara's eyes, relishing the absolute control she held in this stolen moment. She raised the silver-plated revolver, pressing the cold barrel against Clara's temple. "Goodbye, little mouse," Bridget wheezed. "Drop it, Bee." The voice cut through the darkness like a scythe. It was cold, lethal, and devastatingly calm. Bridget froze. The heavy smirk slid off her face, replaced by a sudden sickening pallor. Her men whipped around, raising their weapons, but a volley of suppressed gunfire erupted from the shadows of the hallway. Before Clara could even blink, Bridget's two enforcers dropped to the floor, dead before they hit the marble. Aeneas Costello stepped into the glow of the lanterns. He wasn't at the Arlington estate in New York. He was here. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, a silenced pistol in his hand, looking completely unfazed by the carnage he had just unleashed. Behind him stood half a dozen of his most elite hitters, their weapons trained squarely on Bridget's massive form. Bridget's hand trembled. The silver revolver felt impossibly heavy. She slowly turned her head to look at Aeneas, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Aeneas," she rasped, trying to forcefully inject authority into her panicked voice. You're supposed to be in New York. And you were supposed to be bleeding to death in the velvet room," Aeneas replied smoothly, walking slowly toward her. "But I suppose we both had a change of plans." Aeneas stopped a few feet away, his eyes locking onto the gun Bridget still held near Clara. "I knew about Michael, Bridget," Aeneas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. "I knew about the loan shark in Providence. I knew you bought his debt. I let you buy his debt. I let you walk into this building." Bridget's eyes widened in horror as the realization crashed down upon her. It was a trap. Not her trap, but his. Aeneas hadn't been backed into a corner. He had left the door wide open, inviting the wolf inside just so he could lock it behind her. While you were busy waddling your way up to my home, Aeneas continued his eyes, flicking to Clara to ensure she was unharmed before pinning Bridget with a stare of absolute murder. My men secured your docks. Gregory is dead. The Velvet Room is currently burning to the ground. Your offshore accounts have been drained by my beautiful, brilliant accountant here. Your empire is gone, Bee. It ended 10 minutes ago. Bridget's heavy arm began to shake violently. The gun wavered. She looked at Aeneas, then down at Clara, the woman she had just declared not enough. The sheer immovable mass of Bridget Hill suddenly seemed very frail. If I'm going down, Bridget wheezed, her finger twitching on the trigger. She goes with me. The gunshot was not a deafening roar, but a sharp mechanical spit. Aeneas did not hesitate. He did not issue a final warning, nor did he attempt to talk Bridget down. He simply raised his wrist, aligned the sights of his suppressed heckler and Coke USP, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck Bridget's right shoulder, shattering her clavicle and tearing through the heavy velvet cape. The physical impact of the heavy caliber round was brutal. Bridget let out a wet, gargling shriek, her massive frame shuddering violently as the force knocked her back against the straining leather of the armchair. Her thick fingers went instantly numb, and the heavy silver-plated revolver slipped from her grasp, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull, useless thud. Before Bridget could even register the pain, Aeneas crossed the room in 3 long, predatory strides. He kicked the dropped weapon beneath the sofa and grabbed Clara by the waist, pulling her up and throwing her protectively behind his solid frame. Clara stumbled her breath, catching in her throat, clutching the back of Aeneas's suit jacket as she tried to process the hyper-violence that had just unfolded. The smell of copper and burnt cordite cut through the heavy, cloying stench of Bridget's floral perfume. Bridget lay slumped in the armchair, her massive chest heaving erratically. Blood began to bloom across the dark purple velvet, a dark, spreading stain that mirrored the sudden collapse of her entire world. She clutched her shattered shoulder with her left hand, her diamond rings scraping against the fabric. Her powdered face, usually set in an expression of arrogant disdain, was contorted in sheer, unadulterated agony and disbelief. You shot me!" Bridget wheezed spit, flying from her pale lips. "You pointed a gun at my life. Bridget!" Aeneas said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. He stood over her, his gun now aimed squarely at the center of her wide, gasping chest. "You're lucky I didn't put the round through your eye." The elite hitters in the room moved with terrifying efficiency. They swept the rest of the penthouse, securing the perimeter and checking the bodies of Bridget's 2 dead enforcers. Within seconds, the space was entirely under Aeneas's control. Bridget struggled to sit upright, her incredible physical weight now a crushing hindrance. The pain in her shoulder was blinding, but the humiliation burning in her chest was worse. She looked at Aeneas, the man she had wanted, the man who had spurned her, and saw absolutely nothing in his eyes. No pity. No rage. Just the cold calculation of an exterminator looking at a pest. Then her gaze shifted to Clara. Clara stood behind Aeneas, visibly shaken, her face pale, but her hazel eyes were locked onto Bridget. There was no triumph in Clara's expression, only a profound analytical pity. That pity broke Bridget more than the bullet ever could. "I built the ports." Bridget gasped, her breathing shallow and ragged. "I survived the old days. I ran the shipments through the old Patriarcha crime family routes when you were still a child in Southie. You can't just take it. Boston is mine. Boston belongs to the future Bee," Aeneas replied softly. "And you are a relic. You got fat, you got lazy, and you got careless. You thought you could intimidate me by targeting Clara. But all you did was show me exactly how vulnerable you were." Aeneas gestured sharply to his lieutenant, a tall, scarred man named Dominic. "Bandage her shoulder, tightly. I don't want her bleeding out on my floor." Dominic stepped forward, pulling a heavy-duty trauma kit from his tactical vest. Bridget winced and cursed as the man roughly packed the gunshot wound, his hands entirely unsympathetic to her cries. "What are you going to do to me?" Bridget demanded, a tremor of genuine terror finally cracking her gravelly voice. Her bravado was gone, stripped away by the excruciating pain and the realization of her absolute helplessness. "If I killed you here, it would be a mercy," Aeneas said, crouching down so he was eye level with the fallen mob boss. "But you tried to hurt Clara, so mercy is off the table." Aeneas stood up and adjusted his cuffs. "You've always loved your shipping containers, Bridget. The ones you used to smuggle weapons, drugs, and human collateral. You're going to take a trip in one. It's currently waiting at the commercial shipyard. It's a specialized refrigerated unit, stripped of its insulation. We're going to weld the doors shut from the outside and put it on a freighter bound for the deepest, coldest part of the Bering Sea. You'll have a few cases of your favorite pastries and a single flashlight." Bridget's eyes bulged, the blood draining completely from her heavy face. "No. No, Aeneas, please. You can't. The cold. I won't survive." "That's the point," Aeneas said coldly. "Get her out of my sight. Use the service elevator. And bring the heavy-duty reinforced gurney. She's too heavy for a standard stretcher." "Dos." Bridget began to scream a horrifying, desperate sound that echoed off the bulletproof glass of the penthouse. She fought against Dominic and the other hitters, her massive weight making the struggle grotesque and difficult, but she was weakened by the blood loss. They strapped her violently to a heavy-duty medical gurney, her diamond chokers catching the harsh light of the emergency lanterns one last time before they wheeled her into the darkness of the hallway. The penthouse fell entirely silent, save for the relentless beating of the rain against the windows. Aeneas holstered his weapon and turned to Clara. The cold, unfeeling mob boss vanished, replaced by a man desperate for absolution. He reached for her, pulling her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her hair. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, his hands roaming frantically over her back, checking for injuries. Clara did. "She hurt you." "I'm fine," Clara breathed, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, betraying the calm facade he had just presented. "I'm okay, Aeneas. You came back." "I will always come back for you," he murmured fiercely. "Always." By dawn, the storm had broken, leaving the streets of Boston washed clean and shimmering under a pale grey light. The penthouse had been meticulously scrubbed by Aeneas's cleaning crew. The bodies were gone, the bloodstains bleached and polished out of the marble, and the ruined leather armchair replaced. The power had been restored, and the heating hummed softly. But the psychological residue of the night remained. Clara sat at the massive oak dining table, a mug of black coffee cooling beside her. The digital tablet in front of her was illuminated, displaying the highly classified, encrypted financial ledgers of the Hill Empire. Aeneas had not simply destroyed Bridget, he had absorbed her. As Clara worked her fingers flying across the screen, she marveled at the sheer scale of the corruption. Bridget had been hiding millions, filtering it through legitimate shell companies registered under State Street Corporation to avoid federal oversight. Clara systematically broke down the firewalls, transferring the hidden assets directly into Aeneas's offshore untraceable accounts. Aeneas walked into the dining room, dressed in fresh clothes, looking completely exhausted. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down heavily beside Clara, watching her work. "The shipyards are secured," Aeneas said quietly. "The harbour masters have accepted the change in management. The Velvet Room is a pile of ash, and the fire department has ruled it an electrical fault. It's over. Clara stopped typing and looked at him. The man sitting beside her had ordered a woman to be welded into a metal box and shipped to her death. A few months ago, the very thought would have sent Clara running for the police. But now, looking at the dark circles under Aeneas's eyes, all she felt was a terrifying, unconditional loyalty. "It's not completely over, Aeneas," Clara said softly, turning the tablet toward him. Aeneas frowned, leaning in to look at the screen. "What did you find?" Bridget wasn't acting completely on her own. Clara explained, her analytical mind cutting through the fatigue. "I traced the funding for her private security detail and the bribe she paid to the Providence loan shark. The money didn't come from her primary slush fund. It came from an external account. A blind trust." Aeneas's eyes narrowed, the exhaustion vanishing, instantly replaced by sharp, lethal focus. "Who owns the trust?" "It took me 4 hours to crack the encryption, but I traced the IP routing," Clara said, tapping a specific line of code. "The trust is managed by a private wealth management firm in Chicago, but the primary benefactor is local. It's tied to the Massachusetts State House, specifically a political action committee controlled by State Senator Richard Caldwell." Aeneas leaned back in his chair, a low, dangerous growl rumbling in his chest. "Caldwell, that sanctimonious bastard. He's been running on an anti-organized crime platform for 2 years. He claimed he wanted to clean up the docks." "He didn't want to clean them up," Clara corrected, her eyes sharp. "He wanted a monopoly. He was using Bridget to disrupt your operations. He knew she hated you, so he quietly funded her aggressive expansion, hoping the two of you would destroy each other. When you started winning, he pushed her to take me, knowing it would force a violently reckless confrontation." Aeneas stared at Clara, awe mixing with his rising anger. She was no longer just a hostage, no longer just a civilian to be protected. She had fully integrated into his world. She was his general mapping the battlefield from behind a glowing screen. "Caldwell is insulated," Aeneas mused, rubbing his jaw. "He has federal protection. Hitting a state senator brings the FBI, the DEA, and the National Guard down on our heads. Bridget was a mobster. Caldwell is a politician. It's a different kind of war." "We don't need to hit him with bullets, Aeneas," Clara said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "I have his ledgers. I have the wire transfers from his PAC to Bridget's illicit accounts. I have the proof that he used taxpayer money to fund a mafia turf war." Aeneas looked at her, his heart swelling with a dark, consuming pride. "You want to ruin him." "I want to annihilate him," Clara corrected softly. "He put a target on my back to get to you. We don't just kill him, Aeneas. We expose him. We freeze his assets, leak the documents to the federal prosecutors, and let the government tear him apart. He'll spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary, surrounded by the very criminals he put away." Aeneas reached out his hand, covering hers on the table. The contrast was stark, his knuckles bruised and calloused from a lifetime of violence, her fingers slender and precise. Yet they fit perfectly together. "Do it," Aeneas commanded, his voice dark and absolute. Clara nodded and turned back to the tablet. With a few swift keystrokes, she compiled the damning evidence, formatting it into an encrypted anonymous dossier. She routed the email through a dozen foreign servers, ensuring it could never be traced back to the penthouse, and hit send. By Monday morning, the documents would land on the desks of 3 major Boston news outlets and the local FBI field office. State Senator Caldwell's life, much like Bridget Hill's, was effectively over. Aeneas stood up and pulled Clara gently from her chair, wrapping his arms around her. The war for Boston was done. The throne had been secured. "You're terrifying, you know that," Aeneas whispered against her ear, a genuine relieved smile finally breaking across his face. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She had been dragged into the darkness against her will, but she had found her place within it. She was the immovable anchor to his unstoppable force. "I learned from the best," Clara whispered back. But as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city, they now entirely controlled the shadow of their actions lingered. Power Clara was quickly learning was not a destination. It was a hungry, living thing. And keeping it would require more blood, more secrets, and more sacrifices. A faint buzz from Aeneas's encrypted cell phone on the counter shattered the quiet intimacy of the room. Aeneas pulled away slightly, his brow furrowing as he walked over to check the message. Clara watched him, a knot of dread instantly forming in her stomach as the color drained from his face. "Aeneas," Clara asked, her voice tight. "What is it?" Aeneas looked up, his eyes dark with a fresh, terrifying storm. "It's Dominic. He just got back from the shipyards." "And the refrigerated container." Aeneas said, his voice dropping to a deathly whisper. "The one we put Bridget in." "What about it?" "It's empty, Clara. The welds were cut from the inside out." The silence in the penthouse was no longer a comfort. It was a vacuum sucking the air from Clara's lungs. Aeneas stood frozen, the encrypted cell phone glowing in his hand. The words hung in the air, impossible and terrifying. The welds were cut from the inside out. "That's physically impossible," Clara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She stood up, her analytical mind immediately rejecting the premise. Aeneas, she was morbidly obese, bleeding out from a shattered collarbone and strapped to a reinforced medical gurney. She didn't suddenly manifest a plasma torch and cut through solid steel. Aeneas's eyes were entirely black, the pupils dilated with a primal, predatory rage. Dominic said the slag from the melted steel was pushed outward, but the scorch marks originate from the interior. Someone was in that container waiting for her. He began to pace the length of the dining room, his heavy footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Caldwell. It has to be Caldwell. He knew his proxy war was failing. He knew I was moving on the docks. He stationed a Black Ops extraction team inside the refrigeration unit. "But why save her?" Clara asked, pulling up the dockyard schematics on her tablet, her fingers flying over the glass. "If Bridget's empire is gone and her bank accounts are drained, she's a liability to a state senator. Why risk exposing his own men to pull a dying mob boss out of a shipping container?" Aeneas stopped pacing. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun casting long, dark shadows across the Boston skyline. "Because she isn't just a mob boss, Clara. She's a walking hard drive. Bridget didn't just pay bribes, she documented them. She kept an analog ledger, a physical black book, of every politician, judge, and police commissioner she ever bought. It's the only thing she never digitized. If Caldwell has her, he has the blackmail material to control the entire state. And if she's alive, she's going to use his resources to burn us to the ground." Somewhere deep in the industrial bowels of South Boston, hidden beneath an abandoned textile mill, Bridget Hill was screaming. The subterranean medical bunker smelled of raw iodine and copper. Bridget lay on a reinforced steel operating table that groaned under her immense weight. A disgraced underground trauma surgeon was furiously stitching the jagged, ruined flesh of her right shoulder, working without general anesthesia, because Bridget's massive body mass made the dosage too unpredictable and dangerous. She was sweating profusely, her complexion a sickly mottled grey. Her silk caftan had been cut away, replaced by sterile drapes that failed to cover her vast proportions. But despite the agonizing pain, despite the humiliating loss of her empire, her small, dark eyes burned with a hellish, unquenchable fire. Standing in the corner of the surgical room, wiping a spot of blood from his tailored suit, was a man with cold, bureaucratic eyes. Senator Richard Caldwell. "You're a mess, Bridget," Caldwell said, his voice laced with aristocratic disgust. "Costello dismantled your entire life in less than 12 hours. You promised me the docks. You promised me his head. I underestimated. The girl—" Bridget wheezed, spitting blood into a metal basin beside her head. Her chest heaved with the sheer effort of speaking. The accountant. She drained the offshore accounts. She broke the firewalls. "She did," Caldwell agreed smoothly. "And an hour ago, my cybersecurity team intercepted an encrypted data packet sent to the FBI field office. It contained everything. My PAC funding your slush funds. The little mouse tried to nuke my career." Bridget let out a wet, rattling laugh that quickly dissolved into a cough. "So, you're dead too?" "Not quite," Caldwell replied, stepping closer to the operating table, careful not to touch the sterile field. "I have highly placed friends in the Bureau. The data packet was intercepted and quarantined before it could reach the director. We have a brief window, Bridget, a very brief window. I need Costello dead, and I need the girl's primary server destroyed before she finds another way to leak the information." Bridget forced her left hand to curl into a massive, meaty fist. The humiliation of being rescued by this soft, cowardly politician gnawed at her. But she needed his soldiers. She was stripped of her wealth, her men, and her dignity. All she had left was a singular, monolithic hatred. "You want them dead." Bridget growled, the pain in her shoulder radiating into her thick neck. "I know how Costello thinks. I know where his primary servers are. They're not at the warehouses. They're at the Velvet Room." Caldwell frowned. "The Velvet Room burned down last night." "The club burned down," Bridget corrected, a cruel, bloody smile stretching across her face. "The subterranean vault beneath it where I used to keep my cash. It's bomb-proof. When Costello raided my club, he didn't just burn it. He repurposed the vault. It's the most secure location in the city. That's where he's keeping his central mainframe. And if I know Aeneas, that's where he's going to take the girl to re-upload the data." "Can you walk?" Caldwell asked, looking at her massive, ruined frame with open skepticism. "Strap me into a wheelchair and give me a gun." Bridget wheezed, her eyes entirely devoid of humanity. "I'm going to watch them both burn." The subterranean vault beneath the ashes of the Velvet Room was a marvel of paranoid engineering. Accessible only by a reinforced freight elevator hidden in the alley behind the charred remains of the club, the vault was lined with 2 feet of solid concrete and steel. Clara sat at a massive workstation, surrounded by glowing server racks that hummed with a deep, vibrating power. Aeneas stood behind her, his hand resting reassuringly on the back of her neck. He had deployed his heaviest hitters to guard the perimeter above ground, knowing that Caldwell's intercepted data packet meant the senator was now desperate and hunting them. "I'm recompiling the dossier," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the dual monitors. "If Caldwell has friends in the FBI, we bypass the feds entirely. I'm writing a script to simultaneously drop the ledgers directly onto the servers of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and WikiLeaks. Once it's out in the public domain, no corrupt agent can sweep it under the rug." "How long?" Aeneas asked, his eyes scanning the security feeds on a separate monitor. 10 minutes to encrypt the payload, 2 minutes to transmit," Clara replied, her fingers moving in a blur. Above ground, the rain had started again, washing over the blackened ruins of Bridget's former kingdom. Dominic and his men held the perimeter assault rifles, resting against their tactical vests. But they were looking for a subtle tactical strike. They were looking for black SUVs and suppressed weapons. They were not looking for a garbage truck packed with high-yield industrial explosives. The hijacked sanitation truck slammed through the alleyway barricades at 60 miles per hour. Dominic barely had time to shout a warning before the truck impacted the reinforced concrete foundations of the ruined club and detonated. The explosion tore through South Boston like an artificial earthquake. The shockwave shattered windows for 3 blocks, turning the heavy rain into a misty fog of pulverized concrete and ash. Above ground, Aeneas's perimeter guards were instantly wiped out, the concussive force throwing them like rag dolls. Down in the vault, the ceiling shuddered violently. Dust and debris rained down on the servers, and the overhead lights flickered before dying, instantly replaced by the harsh red glow of the emergency backup system. Aeneas threw himself over Clara, pulling her to the floor beneath the heavy steel workstation as a section of the concrete ceiling cracked and collapsed. "Clara, are you hit?" Aeneas yelled over the ringing in his ears, coughing through the thick, choking dust. "I'm okay," Clara gasped, scrambling to check the monitors. "The servers are on isolated battery backups. The upload is at 60%. Before Aeneas could pull her up, the heavy steel doors of the vault groaned. The external locking mechanisms had been shattered by the concussive wave of the explosion. With a horrific screech of tearing metal, the doors were wrenched open by a hydraulic breaching ram. Through the settling dust and the flashing red emergency lights, the nightmare returned. Senator Caldwell's tactical mercenaries flooded into the vault, sweeping the room with laser sights. Aeneas immediately returned fire, his suppressed pistol dropping the first 2 men through the choke point of the doorway. But there were too many. He pulled Clara behind the server racks, trapping them in the back corner of the vault. And then, moving through the center of the mercenaries, came Bridget. She was a vision of absolute grotesque vengeance. Pushed in a reinforced heavy-duty industrial wheelchair by a mercenary, Bridget looked like a demon forged in ash and blood. Her massive body was draped in a black tactical blanket, her right arm heavily bandaged and strapped to her chest. But in her left hand, resting on her vast lap, she held a compact submachine gun. Her breathing was a horrific, wheezing rattle that echoed over the hum of the servers. "Costello!" Bridget roared, her voice a wet, gravelly shriek. "You think you can bury me? I am the ground you walk on." "Keep the upload going," Aeneas whispered to Clara, dropping his empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. "Do not move from this spot." Aeneas stepped out from the cover of the server racks, exposing himself to draw their fire away from Clara's workstation. He moved with terrifying precision, firing 3 shots that dropped the mercenary, pushing Bridget's wheelchair, then diving behind a concrete support pillar as the remaining soldiers opened fire, shredding the space he had just occupied. Bridget, now stationary in the center of the room, raised her weapon with her good arm and sprayed blindly toward the server racks. "Kill the girl, destroy the machines!" She screamed, spit flying from her lips. Clara kept her head down her hands, shaking violently over the keyboard. 80%! Aeneas leaned out from the pillar, taking precise, methodical shots. He wasn't a soldier. He was an executioner. He put a bullet through the eye of a mercenary, flanking the servers, then shattered the knee of another, before finishing him with a headshot. Within 60 seconds, the highly trained Black Ops team was dead, their bodies littering the floor of the vault. Only Bridget remained. She sat in the heavy-duty wheelchair, her chest heaving, the submachine gun clicking empty in her left hand. She stared at the dead men around her, then slowly looked up as Aeneas stepped out from behind the pillar, his weapon aimed squarely at the center of her massive chest. Clara stood up from the workstation, the monitors flashing a bright, solid green. Transmission complete. It's done, Clara breathed, looking at Aeneas. The files are public. Caldwell is finished. Bridget heard the words, and a deep, guttural sound escaped her throat. It was a sound of absolute defeat, the sound of a leviathan finally bleeding out. She had lost her empire, her wealth, her body was shattered, and now her final revenge was thwarted. "You're a monster, Aeneas." Bridget wheezed, blood leaking from the corner of her mouth. Her small eyes shifted to Clara, burning with a final toxic spite. "And you will never be safe. The weight of what he is will crush you." Aeneas did not blink. He walked slowly toward the wheelchair, the red emergency lights painting his face in shadows. "You were wrong about her. Bridget," Aeneas said quietly, his voice cutting through the thick, dust-filled air. "She isn't the weight. She's the one who carries it." Aeneas raised his weapon. "Goodbye, B." The gunshot echoed deafeningly in the enclosed concrete vault. Bridget Hill's head snapped back, her massive frame, shuddering once before going entirely still. The oppressive, suffocating gravity she had imposed on everyone around her finally dissipated, leaving only silence. Aeneas lowered his gun. He let out a long, ragged breath, the adrenaline slowly leaving his system. He turned and looked at Clara. She was covered in ash, her hair wild, her hand still resting on the keyboard that had just dismantled a corrupt political dynasty. She looked exhausted, terrified, and entirely magnificent. He walked over to her, pulling her into a fierce, desperate embrace. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her, grounding himself in the only pure thing left in his violently fractured world. "It's over," Aeneas whispered fiercely. "It's truly over." Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. She looked past his shoulder at the ruined vault, the flashing servers, and the body of the woman who had tried to end them. She had entered this world a hostage, a naive accountant, terrified of the shadows. But as she held on to the most dangerous man in Boston, Clara realized the truth. She was no longer afraid of the dark. She ruled it. This dark, high-stakes mafia romance proves that true power doesn't lie in physical dominance or political corruption, but in the unbreakable loyalty between two people willing to burn the world down for each other. Clara went from a captive to a queen, matching Aeneas's lethal brawn with her undeniable brilliance, proving once and for all that she was more than enough. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey into the Boston underworld, make sure to like this video, share it with your fellow Mafia Romance fans, and subscribe to the channel for more pulse-pounding dramatic stories.